Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Praise Yahweh for another wonderful Shabbat from a very crisp Cape Town. Very, very crisp. Probably one of the coldest evenings we've had so far. We praise our Master that we're able to be in his presence together as we enjoy being in his word and delighting ourselves in his day that sets us apart. Carol saying Shabbat Shalom, set apart family, favor, compassion of our Master and Elohim remain with you as you grow in knowing him. Yahweh bless you and strengthen you. Carter saying Shabbat Shalom, Ursula, Mandy, and Gillian all saying Shabbat Shalom. Good to be together. I know that Patrick's online with us and Joshua and Guguletu too, so nice for our family to be together. And we are continuing our journey in Shemoth from Shemoth 21 through to the end of 24 today. And Kayla is ready to start on Shemoth 21. Okay.
And Yahweh said to Moshe, speak to the priests.
21.
21.
Oh, my word.
Shemoth 21, where were you? You're going to get there soon.
Sorry. These are the right rulings which you are to set before them. When you buy a Hebrew servant, he serves 6 years, and in the 7th he goes out free, for naught. If he comes in by himself, he goes out by himself. If he comes in married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master has given him a wife, and she has borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children are her master's, and he goes out by himself. And if the servant truly says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, let me not go out free, then his master shall bring him before Elohim, and shall bring him to the door, or to the doorpost, and his master shall pierce his ear with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. And when a man sells his daughter to be a female servant, she does not go out as the male servants do. If she is displeasing in the eyes of her master who has engaged her to himself, then he shall let her be ransomed. He shall have no authority to sell her to a foreign people because of him deceiving her. And if he has engaged her to his son, he is to do to her as is the right of daughters. If he takes another wife, her food, her covering, and her marriage rights are not to be diminished. And if he does not do these 3 for her, then she shall go out for naught, without silver. He who strikes a man so that he die shall certainly be put to death. But if he did not lie in wait, but Elohim delivered him into his hand, then I shall appoint for you a place where he is to flee. But when a man acts presumptuously against his neighbor, to kill him by treachery, you are to take him, even from my slaughter place, to die. And he who strikes his father or his mother shall certainly be put to death. And he who kidnaps a man and sells him, or if he is found in his hand, shall certainly be put to death. And he who curses his father or his mother shall certainly be put to death. And when men strive together, and one strikes the other with a stone or with his fist, and he does not die, but is confined to his bed, if he rises again and walks about outside with his staff, then he who struck him shall be innocent. He only pays for lost time, and sees to it that he is completely healed. And when a man strikes his male or female servant with a rod, so that he dies under his hand, he shall certainly be punished. But if he remains alive a day or 2, he is not punished, for he is his property. And when men strive, and they shall smite a pregnant woman, and her children come out, yet there is no injury, he shall certainly be punished accordingly, as the woman's husband lays upon him, and he shall give through the judges. But if there is injury, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, lash for lash. And when a man strikes the eye of his male or female servant and destroys it, he is to let him go free for the sake of his eye. And if he knocks out the tooth of his male or female servant, he is to let him go free for the sake of his tooth. And when an ox gores a man or a woman to death, then the ox shall certainly be stoned, and its flesh is not eaten, and the owner of the ox is innocent. However, if the ox was previously in the habit of goring, and its owner has been warned, and he has not kept it confined so that it has killed a man or woman, the ox is stoned, and its owner also is put to death. If a sin covering is laid upon him, then he shall give the ransom of his life, whatever is laid on him. Whether it has gored a son or gored a daughter, according to this right ruling, it is done to him. If the ox gores a male or female servant, he is to give to their master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox is stoned. And when a man opens a pit, or if a man digs a pit and does not cover it, and an ox or a donkey falls in it, the owner of the pit is to repay. He is to give silver to their owner, and the dead beast is his. And when the ox of a man smites the ox of his neighbor, and it dies, then they shall sell the live ox, and divide the silver from it, and also divide the dead ox. Or if it was known that the ox was previously in the habit of goring, and its owner has not kept it confined, he shall certainly repay ox for ox while the dead beast is his.
Okay, so this week's Torah portion is called Mishpatim, which means right rulings. It's the plural of the word mishpat, which is right ruling or judgment or ordinance or regulation. And it comes from the root verb shafat, which means to judge, to govern, to rule, to give law, or to pronounce. And what we take note very clearly as we have come into covenant with our Creator and Redeemer is that there is only one who gives us law by which we are to live, and there's only one judge that we are governed by in terms of a life and death choice that we are to make every day. And these judgments and right rulings that we are reading here are given by him, the one who is our Redeemer, who saves us. Yeshayahu 33 verse 22 reminds us when it says, "For Yahweh is our judge, Yahweh is our lawgiver, Yahweh is our sovereign, he saves us." And so last week we looked at the 10 words that Yahweh spoke to the entire nation at Mount Sinai. They're still at Mount Sinai, and Israel then asked Moshe to let Moshe hear whatever other words that Yahweh wanted to speak to them, to give them as ordinances, as part of a covenant relationship. And they said to Moshe, "You go to Yahweh and receive all the instructions and everything that we need, and we will do everything that Yahweh speaks to you to give to us to do." And so these are the right rulings, or the further instructions that Moshe came to deliver to a nation that had entered into a marriage covenant with our master. And it expands on the words that they all physically heard from our master. And these are the rules for proper righteous living as a nation that is set apart, chosen, and called out by our Creator. And so these mishpatim are what one would better understand as being referred to as the legal procedures or the firm rulings that are actually non-negotiable. In other words, this is how a community, this is how a nation is to be ruled and governed. And this is how right ruling is supposed to be administered in the small or bigger cases, in every situation that anyone may find themselves in, and any issues that would arise need to be dealt with in a proper manner according to these legal procedures. And therefore we understand that this is a prescribed way from our Creator that is completely just and fair. Now, these are also what are referred to in many ways as the social laws, because it clearly teaches us how we are to relate to one another, how we're to get on with one another, how we are to deal with each other in any given situation that might arise. And therefore, how we are to live according to how we have been created to walk in and be in as a body of Yahushua Messiah. Now, Tehillah 89 verse 14 tells us that righteousness and right ruling are the foundation of your throne. Loving commitment and truth go before your face. We see again in Tehillah 97 verse 2, clouds and darkness are all around him. Righteousness and right ruling are the foundation of his throne. So here we're already looking at the foundational basis of covenant relationship with one another, showing that this is how we love one another as a reflection of our love for our master that comes first. So these are the righteousnesses of the set apart ones. These are the right rulings or the justice that form the foundation of the throne of our Elohim. I'm definitely not from England saying throne, the throne of our Elohim. And the Hebrew word that's translated as foundation is machon, which means a fixed, established place, a dwelling place, a habitation or foundation. And it comes from the verb kun, which means to be ready, established, firm, set up, determined or prepared. So why I'm highlighting this is because this is laid in stone in a sense. These are non-negotiable social laws that our master has put in place as boundaries by which we live as a set apart, called out, chosen people that are to give him all the praise and esteem in how we love him and love one another. And so we are told in Mishle 16 verse 12 that a throne is established in righteousness And therefore we recognize and acknowledge that the throne of our Master and Elohim has been established. And it's been established in righteousness. And therefore we recognize what we are being called to walk in and what we are called to follow as we observe carefully the instructions, the right rulings, the ordinances that are given to us from our righteous Elohim and King, showing us that Yeshua Messiah hasn't come to bring another foundation. He hasn't come to break up a foundation that's been established as a covenant relationship with our Master. He's come to fully proclaim it and establish it as the way in which we are to walk in him. So this is how he rightly rules his people. These are the rules that teach us this is how our righteous judge rules us and governs us. And therefore we can put great confidence and trust in him because he's laid it out very plainly before us how we are to be set apart, how we are to live. And it's not something that we have to try and figure out on our own. This is clear, established guidelines for righteous set apart living. And so as we stay in him, we realize that in staying in him, we subject ourselves to his kingdom rules, which we are reading here this morning, again, as afresh. We have a righteous judge and king. We don't have a lawless king. I mean, that would be a bit crazy. Now, as a people who walk according to the Spirit, these are instructions on how we walk according to the Spirit. And so therefore we have a righteous Savior and King, forever high priest in the order of Melchizedek, our righteous King, our sovereign who is righteous, our sovereign who is righteous according to his standards of righteousness, which he's made plain and made known to us, which he in the flesh came to proclaim and fully establish as the only foundation upon which we must be built as living stones. So these Mishpatim are, as I said, the boundaries which we are to live by, and we are to rightly judge the clear standards of obedient community living. And we do not judge our children, one another, or anything else outside the clearly prescribed ordinances and right rulings that our Master has set forth for us. Now, in contrast to many nations of the world today, whatever nation you're living in, a lot of the nation's laws are constantly changing. They're constantly being renewed to become what they determine as culturally relevant. I mean, even many Christian churches have tried to be culturally relevant, to change, to keep people within their framework of accepted behavior, whereas a lot of those culturally relevant bylaws that man has introduced break the very foundation of the throne of our Master. And if you break that foundation, what foundation are you being built up on? It's then one that's not on the rock of our deliverance, it's one that's on sand. And when the storm comes, those lawless bylaws, because yes, they can be lawless laws that are given to govern people, will prove not to be a secure boundary when our Master comes in vengeance upon the sons of disobedience. Now, the wisdom of Yahweh that is found in the Torah is surpassing beauty. It's something that we can't fully comprehend, but we seek it out. With all our getting, we're continually getting wisdom. We're growing in the wisdom and knowledge of our Master. And therefore we realize without the wisdom of Elohim, without calling, as Shlomo says, call wisdom your sister. In other words, it must be so close to you, you must be seeking it out. And therefore, without his wisdom, we can't actually be ruled or govern our lives in a community together according to his set-apart standards. And the renewed covenant is not a new set of instructions. It's just a new place where he wrote them. And that is now on the fleshly tablets of our heart and not on tablets of stone. And so we understand that our Master came to renew a covenant that his bride broke. And in his own blood, he came to wash and redeem a bride, call back this bride to him in set apartness, by which he would provide the necessary means to repair, restore, and establish firmly a covenant that is based on the foundation that he himself is as the rock of our deliverance, and upon which he, as our judge, our lawgiver, our sovereign, and the one who saves us, sits and rules his set-apart bride by every single day and forever. And the first right ruling that's given to us in these right rulings is about slavery. And Israel had been set free from slavery to Mitzrayim, the harsh labor that they had to endure for many, many centuries, that Avram was told they would be. And they would be delivered from this nation, and Yahweh would destroy that nation. Now it goes on and it talks about when you buy a Hebrew servant. Now, this isn't slavery to a foreigner. This is speaking of a servant within Israel. Now, one would become a servant of another if you needed to get out of debt. If things had been going rough with you and you needed to now recover that debt, you could go and become a servant or a slave of another within Israel. So you could serve out that debt and therefore become the property of the one that you've been sold to for the time that's allocated for servanthood. A Hebrew servant was never seen as a slave in the mindset of the enslavement that they were under in Mitzrayim. And rather, a servant, or, when we hear the word slave today, in the modern context, we think of harsh labor as in the context of being in Mitzrayim. But the idea of a servant or slave, it's the same Hebrew word that's understood as that, but being in this right ruling is not one that's put to harsh punishment, not one that's treated harshly, but rather is one that's seen now as one of the family. They're taken in. They're taken in, and now they have to serve in the family for sure as a servant until they were released of their duty of service that's been agreed upon. This right ruling that's given here is that a servant cannot serve longer than 6 years. And then they were allowed to go free in the 7th year. Now, it's not to say that a servant wouldn't only serve 1 year, but the term would be 6 years, and the maximum is 6 years, and go out in the 7th year. Being a slave or a servant in Abraham's house, a covenanted house with our master, was a better condition than most free men in other nations of that time. And we think about this in the picture that we're given. I'll mention a couple of verses to highlight from the renewed writings of how we are bond servants to our master. So we understand this right ruling in teaching us straight up. The first right ruling is an identity of who we are in the master. And as bond servants of our master, it's better for us to be in his house than to be in the world thinking we're free, and without law, And we think about the parable of the prodigal son that our master gave. I mean, he understood that the servants in his father's house had it better for him as being a slave that was rolling around with the pigs when he'd lost everything, Joel reminds us in Corinthians, the first letter in chapter 7, verse 23, you were bought with a price. Do not become slaves of men. That is 1 Corinthians, but is what you were. You're knocking on the table. So a slave would sell himself to pay off his debt. Now we understand from the mirror of the word and the parables that we can see and how we see Messiah in the Torah is that we have been bought at a price. Yeshua Messiah paid the price for our ransom because lawlessness and sin kidnapped us in many ways. We are now, having been bought at a price by his blood, are bondservants. And therefore, we are told very clearly that we must not become slaves of men by selling ourselves into their hands due to debt and enslavement to sin. And so Yeshua's paid our immeasurable debt because no man could pay the debt that we were found in through sin and lawlessness, by which one man sin had entered into all mankind. And so therefore, it's a debt that we could never work off. Our master came in the flesh of man to pay that debt fully, in order that we can be set free from the world and slavery to man and be able to be a trustworthy servant that can serve him without all. And hear the words when our master that we long to hear when our master returns. Well done, good and trustworthy servant. A Hebrew servant refers to one who's crossed over, and therefore does not refer to one of those who were captured in war, etc. So this chapter carries on in regards to the servant. It says, go out as you came in. If a servant got married with the wife given to him by his master while he was a servant, and then in the 7th year he wants to go out, he couldn't take his wife with him. Now, this would be a harsh lesson for slaves who were not their own. Yet, here's a wonderful picture. It's not like you can't be with your wife forever, but here's a wonderful picture that highlights that when we come to our master, the reality of this is there should be no leaving. And if the servant says, I love my master, my wife, and my children, let me not go out free, then the servant serves him forever. There's no release after that. There's no seventh year, you can go now. This is such a profound statement that's being given to us here, one that we make as true servants of our master, our Savior, Redeemer, who has given us freedom in the Torah that we have now been brought into as a covenant ordinance or regulation for set-apart living as a bondservant of our master. So we've made the good confession, and we've declared our love for Elohim, our Savior, that we will serve him forever. Yet there was something that was to happen. And when we understand this, we can recognize how this applies to us still today, because it's a living word. It's an everlasting covenant. That's the same conditions no matter what generation that you've been born into. Firstly, we note that the clear order that's been shown to us here, because it says, if a servant truly says, I love my master, wife, and children. Love for the master comes first. Now, it doesn't mean that love is secondary in its application to our wife and our children and to others. But if love isn't birthed out of a love for our master first, then love cannot be properly shown to anyone else. And that's the clear picture that we looked at in the 10 words that our master spoke last week, well, when we looked at last week, but he speaks to us every day. We notice what comes first when our master speaks to us in parables. In Lucas 14, verse 26, it says, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters and his own life too, he's unable to be my taught one. In Matthew 10, verse 37, he says, he who loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he who loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Love for our master comes first. This doesn't diminish, as I said, our love for our wife and our children, or our spouse and our children, but it reflects the true nature of our love, what it's birthed from. You know, when we have such zealous love for our master, which is to guard his commands, then it will be a natural flow to love our spouse, our children, and our neighbors, and even our enemies, you know, and showing complete love in our service to him, which would equip us to show the kind of love that we are to have for family. And love for him must always be our primary focus, because that will cause us to have a true, genuine love for others. You know, love is more than just an emotion. It's an active principle of doing what's required by the one that you've subjected yourself to. And this is what we learn from these right rulings straight up, because we are all bondservants of our master. We've made the confession that we love him. Many honor him with their lips and say that they love him, but they don't show that love in the application of doing the right rulings for set-apart living. Love speaks of true and total commitment to him. And when he says, unless you hate your mother or your father or your wife or your children, he's using it, he spoke in parables, because a lot of people, when it comes down to it, they choose the whims of others in the flesh over obedience to the master, whether it be in certain right rulings or certain instructions regarding obedience to the master, whether it be for the Sabbath feasts or food or whatever else, or company you keep. They tend to show preference to the pulling of the flesh of others than rather saying no to the ways of the flesh, because love for Yahweh comes first in obedience. And that's how we show our love for others, when we won't break the right rulings of our master. And so those who claim to stay in the house yet don't love him could actually be referred to as thieves rather than servants, because they've broken in, so to speak, and think they're part of the house. And this, what we're seeing in this here, is another picture of a call for voluntary service. Our master didn't force any of this upon us. We can love him because he first loved us. He voluntarily gave himself for us, and therefore shows us the kind of reciprocal action we are to have toward him by voluntarily saying, I am yours forever. And when you make that voluntary offering of your life in service and love to him, you actually relinquish all further choices, because now his choice for set-apart living becomes the choice by which you live by, you know? And this is a recognition of being bought at a price, because it's for freedom that he set us free. And it's the Torah of freedom that Shaul refers to that we are now able to live by. It's not something that's harsh, but it's something that gives us identity as true members of a household of the living Elohim. True love for our master is seen in submission and obedience to his commands. That's the bottom line. And as we walk in love, Ephesians 5 verse 2, as Messiah also has loved us and gave himself for us, a gift and an offering to Elohim for a sweet-smelling fragrance. So therefore, we also are to be the fragrance of Messiah before his face as we give our lives as an offering, a daily offering in thanksgiving, a slaughter offering of living daily according to his ordinances, his right rulings, his Torah. If Elohim so loved us, we ought to also love one another. Yochanan Aleph 4 verse 11. Yochanan Aleph, also in chapter 4, verse 19 to 21, says, we love him because he first loved us, as I said. If someone says, I love Elohim, and hates his brother, he is a liar. For the one not loving his brother whom he has seen, how is he able to love Elohim whom he has not seen? And we have this command from him, that the one loving Elohim should also love his brother too. So again, it's a picture of what is love. And I think that's the thing that the enemy has done very craftily in disguising a corrupt version of love, where people have now corrupted the idea, the clear standard of what love is for Yahweh. 1 John makes it very clear for us in a number of verses that by this we know that we love Elohim when we guard his commands. By this we know that we love one another when we guard the commands of Elohim. Because that's how we show love to one another. We don't cut corners and bend the rules, because bending the rule is breaking the rule. That's as clear as we get it. It's black or white, in terms of right rulings before the master. And the goal of it is love, ultimately. And when it says here, when a servant truly says. So again, it's this coming from, many people can say they love. But you will know somebody truly loves Yahweh when they will not be given over to breaking of the commands for the sake of other relationships that somehow get put before Yahweh. And that's what our master was speaking in parables about, And the clear intent of truly saying, I don't want to leave you, is what we are reminded of today when we've made the bold confession, when we said yes to our master. And we don't want to leave his house. And so part of the application that we understand from this Torah of what a servant would have to do to stay in a house that now for 6 years he's seen, this is great. Now maybe he's got a wife. Maybe it was, hey, if I leave my wife and children, I'll be on my own. So that's it might have pulled him towards saying, I want to stay in the house. But it really has to come from the servant's heart, where he says, I truly love my master. And what the master would then do is bring him to the door. We know Yochanan 10 verse 7, Yeshua says, I am the door. We know there's only one way into covenant, and that's by the blood of Yeshua Messiah. And therefore, when the Hebrew word that's translated as bring is nagash, which means to draw near, approach, or come closer, it's written in the causative tense, which highlights the causative action of the servant's declaration for the love for his master. He's not waiting to be told what to do. He's caused by the love of his master. He's caused to draw near and say, I love you. I'm coming to enter into your house forever. And that's the bold confession that we make of our master, And bring him to the door and bringing him to the doorpost. Gates and doorposts are symbolic of the place where we are reminded of the right rulings. Because in a city, at the gates of a city is where the judges would typically sit, and they would have the judgments or right rulings administered for any cases that would be brought before them. And so we also realize and are reminded in the Torah as well that we are to write his commands on the doorposts of our homes, so that as we go out and as we come in, we are reminded that we are a covenanted people that have said yes, that we're not belonging to any other house but that of the master, being built up in him as living stones, and therefore we're reminded of the right rulings that we are to live by. And part of that reminder is by the tzitzit that we wear, so that we are reminded not to rebel against the right rulings and the clear foundations that our master has given us to be built up in him. So we realize that we are people who have been called out of darkness. We come to the door, our Messiah. We realize coming to the doorpost, and as pictured by now, the master would take an awl and pierce the ear of his servant at the door and doorposts of his house. The Hebrew word for doorpost, mezuzah, means doorpost or gatepost. And it's in Devarim 6 and 11 where we're told that we are to write them on the doorposts of our house and on our gates. Devarim 6 verse 9, 11 verse 20. So therefore already we have two witnesses as confirmation that it's established that we are to write the commands on the doorposts of our homes, and you do well. Now, a mezuzah is a doorpost. The Hebrew word is mezuzah, the English word is doorpost. Okay, so we all got doorposts. So you don't have to go to the market and buy a mezuzah. A little, kind of, I don't know what that, marketed little tool that's the mezuzah. You must put on your mezuzah. You don't put a mezuzah on a mezuzah. So you can get very creative in putting commands and laws and ordinances around your doorposts, And so I'm just highlighting that so that you're not caught by the marketing strategies of many for centuries that have tried to say you need to have a specific mezuzah that has a little scroll rolled up and it only has Devarim 6 verse 4 to 6 in it as a standard on traditional means. We can write them. Now we take strips of wood sometimes and we burn tin it and, some verses either in English or Hebrew, and we put it up, and it's very, we've been given boundaries by which we are free to live by in an expression of our love for our master. And so it would be good to remind us, and it's a good talking point whenever you have visitors to your home as well. Hey, what's this? Well, let me tell you whose house I'm part of, And piercing the ear is a picture of a servant saying, I will listen to your rules of your house. And what's a wonderful picture about this is that he's written his covenant now on our hearts, the Hebrew word for heart, lev. It's spelt with a lamet and a beit, and in the pictographic lettering, it's a picture of a shepherd's rod and a floor plan of a house. So it highlights the rules or the authority of the house, the rules of the house that are written on our heart. So even in the pictographic of the word for heart reminds us where Yahweh's laws are to be. And so therefore, when we have our ears pierced, it's a clear witness of saying, I have ears to hear in order to God to do that which you've written upon my heart. Tehillah 40 verse 6 says, slaughtering and meal offering you did not desire, you have opened my ears. Burnt offering and sin offering you did not ask for. So we understand that there's a clear witness here in Scripture versus that which Joel warns against in the last days. We are to be prepared as servants of the Most High to have our ears pierced with an identity of who we are. That's why in Chazon, the 7 assemblies are asked, he who has an ear, let him hear. In other words, he whose ears have truly been pierced are true servants, bondservants, family members of the household of Elohim. Hear these right rulings that come with warnings, reproofs, encouragements, disciplines, so that you remain in the house and are not thrown out of the house for not having kept the rules of the house. And so the warning that Shaul gives us is against those that will tickle the ear. And in these last days, especially with how we can see technology giving access to everybody, heaping up for themselves that which just tickles the ear. Rather than coming to the doorpost, it's also a picture again of coming every Shabbat, drawing near as in the door of a tent of appointment, every Shabbat, every feast, to have ears prepared to be reminded of who we are as the household of Elohim, so that we bear that proper witness in the other 6 days of the week as lights in a dark world. So we must be on guard against ear tickling. He warned Timotheus about how many will heap up for themselves teachers that are just soothing their ears, tickling their ears, and they've turned away from the truth, and they are turning aside to myths, to hearsay, to dogmas of man, that have clearly stripped away any identity with that which we have as set-apart children in the Most High. Now, the Greek word for tickling that Shaul warns us against is knetho, which means to scratch or to itch. And it's used as a metaphor for having a desire or itch to hear something that's soothing and pleasant to the ears. Now, in a time where things are getting darker, harder, most people rather just want to be soothed. They have this desire just to hear something good to their flesh. Now, Yahweh's word that pierces is good because it's functional. You know, Shaul warned about a time where this would happen, and we also see the pattern that's displayed during the days of Yeshayahu, when they were rebellious to hearing the Torah of Elohim, and they just wanted smooth, flattering words. In the days of Yechezkiel, you know, they just wanted to be told what was nice. Don't tell us all the laws and the right rulings. Don't tell us where we're wrong, and, just, tell us what we want to hear. And that's what most want to do today, In Yeshayahu, they said, don't prophesy to us what is right in Yeshayahu 30. Speak to us what's smooth. Prophesy deceits. Turn away from the truth. Swerve from the path. Cause the set-apart one of Israel to cease from before us. That's what they were saying in the days of Yeshayahu. And most people might not be saying it verbally from their lips, but their actions are clearly saying the very same thing today. And people who refuse to hear the Torah of Yahweh seek out those who'll speak to them what is smooth, and they'll even do it on a Sabbath, thinking that they give themselves a pat on the back, saying, wow, look at me, I'm set apart, yet are not learning the right rulings to determine how to separate the clean from the unclean, the set apart from the profane. Now, the Hebrew word that's translated as smooth, in terms of the smooth words that many want to hear as given in Yeshayahu 30, comes from the word chelka, which means smooth part, smoothness, flattery, pleasant words, coming from the verb chalak, which means to be deceitful, to flatter or seduce. And it also carries the understanding of giving misleading opinions or thoughts about what is true, and often encouraging the wrong behavior. Now, doesn't that sound familiar with most people today? This root verb chalak is used to describe the smooth and flattering words of the whore in Mishle 7 verse 5, or the strange woman, where it says, we must guard wisdom because it will guard you against the strange woman, against the foreigner who flatters with her words. Now, a foreigner is somebody that's not of the house. But most people can't distinguish between who's of the house and who's not of the house. The book of Jude or Yehuda warns us about those that are feasting with you, but yet they've gone in the way of Cain, the ways of Bilam. And so we understand that this is a severe warning that many aren't taking heed to today because, it all just sounds nice. We can all, wow, that sounds cool. And so coming to the door of the house at the doorpost and having our ears pierced is a commitment we make to our master to be one of the house, and committed to making our ears attentive to his instructions always. As servants who have been bought at a price, we've been called to hear God and do his commands. We are servants of the Most High. I said earlier, I'll give you a couple of verses. Shaul was a servant of Yeshua Messiah. In Romans 1 verse 1, he opens his letter to the believers in Rome. Shaul, a servant of Yeshua Messiah, a called emissary, separated to the good news of Elohim. Yaakov, James, half-brother of Yeshua, was a servant of Yeshua Messiah. Yaakov, in James 1 verse 1, a servant of Elohim and of the Master Yeshua Messiah, to the 12 tribes who are in the dispersion, greetings. Kepha, a servant of Yeshua Messiah. In his second letter, he opens up Shimon Kepha, a servant and emissary of Yeshua Messiah, to those who have obtained a belief as precious as ours by the righteousness of our Elohim and Savior, Yeshua Messiah. We've obtained belief as precious as the believers in our Master's day by the righteousness of our Elohim, and righteousness and right ruling are the foundation of his throne, the foundation on which he sits as sovereign. Yehuda was a servant of Yeshua Messiah. Yehuda, servant of Yeshua Messiah, brother to Yaakov, to those who are called, set apart by Elohim the Father, and preserved in Yeshua Messiah. As a servant of Messiah, we are committing to having ears to hear God and do. He reminds Timotheus in 2 Timothy 2:24, Shaul says, and as servant to the master, should not quarrel, but be gentle towards all, able to teach, patient when wronged. And in Yeshayahu 44, it makes us clear that we're all, as Israel, servants of the Most High. When it says, but now hear, O Yaakov, my servant, and Israel, whom I have chosen. But now hear. This is a call to people who have understood the necessity of coming to the door as servants. You know, a servant is one who submits to the master. And being servants or bond servants of the Most High highlights that this picture of not going out anymore, but staying in the house and agreeing to the rules of the house. How can you be a servant if you don't obey the rules of the house? That's what it comes down to. And then we go on to the female slave and the protection that's given to a female who's given as a servant. The translation here uses the word engaged, and the Hebrew word for engaged is ya'at, which means to appoint or agree to meet, be assigned to, designated or summoned. So perhaps it's not the best English translation, because when we read this, it can be misleading as to only focus on one that's been given as a wife, either to the master or the son. But it's not the case. It's a female servant that's been assigned to a master of the house or the master's son of the house. Assigned to, so the wife, even in italics, is not the best translation. I mean, a master or a son may. In time, yes, not in this context, but I'm saying, I want you to understand that there can be a time when a master or a son will take one that's now in the house forever as a wife to himself. But in the context of this is about being a servant, male or female, and the specific rights that are given to each. And speaking of a female servant, when a man sells his daughter as a servant, she doesn't go out free as male servants do. This was possibly because, now it sounds, we have to understand context. It sounds cruel when a man sells his daughter as a servant. It can be that it's a way to pay off the debt that his daughter could go and serve in the house, where her father's debt could also be paid off. Now, if she was engaged to her master's son, again, appointed or assigned to, it's the same standards that's given if it's to the master or the master's son. She must not be diminished in her rights as being part of the household. That's really what this is all about. She can still marry. She's not isolated from living within the house as one of the house. She's basically seen as a daughter of the house. Okay? And the Hebrew word that's translated as marriage rights is ona, which means cohabitation rights as well as marriage rights. But again, the context that's given here in the Hebrew is the living rights.
Also, because she's working for you doesn't mean she can't get married.
No. Yes. Yes. And if the son takes another to be his servant or even his wife, in terms of the covering that's there, the living rights of the female servant that's been assigned to the son cannot be diminished.
I mean, it's so interesting because you talked about being culturally relevant and whatever, but when we talk about the words we use,
yes,
because we say slave and servant, immediately people get a negative connotation. But if I said boss and worker, you would think something completely different.
yes,
And that is what this is saying.
yes,
The minute you don't work for yourself anymore and you work for someone else, he's your boss, he pays your salary,
yes,
you become his servant.
yes. Maybe a better one is manager employee.
No.
Yeah.
But
Yes.
when you I work for you, I serve you.
Yes.
I must do what you say.
Yes.
I can't do whatever I want.
No.
If we change these words into boss and worker, or the one who pays your salary and the one who works for that salary,
Yes.
you become the servant.
Yes.
Now that's the same also with the female. When you say I sell my daughter to be someone's servant, it sounds horrible. But if I say I owe you, so my daughter's going to go work for you for a salary, and that's going to pay off the debt.
Yes.
It gets a whole other meaning.
Yeah.
And that is what this
That's the context of this.
talking about.
Yes.
So it's not about selling her off to be married.
No,
because
no.
That is not Yahweh's will.
No.
You go and you get paid because she married you.
Yeah.
Somebody's thing, whatever. It's about, we agree that because I'm in your debt, my daughter can go serve you,
Yes.
clean your house, or babysit your children or whatever,
Yeah.
and that will pay my debt off.
Yeah.
But while she's doing that, she's not treated like a man.
Yeah.
She's treated like
A daughter.
and she can still marry someone.
Yes.
And I was thinking about if you're a slave and you get a wife, it's like today it's like a guy and a woman works for the same boss, and they end up getting married, and he wants to leave. Then what they're saying is the woman must still do her job.
Yes.
She doesn't.
She doesn't get to go free.
Get to
Yeah.
go free now.
Yes.
I mean, in a sense.
Yes.
If we start seeing it in terms of words that we use today, it doesn't change the meaning of the chapter.
Yeah.
Just use those words so we don't immediately get a negative connotation because we were brought up to think you serve someone, you a slave or
Yeah.
you're a lesser being or
No.
anything. It's not like that. You're not a person chained to a pole and you must just,
Yes. And what's happening here, if he finds no favor in her eyes and he now takes another to do those chores, if she finds no favor in his eyes, for some reason, the master or the master's son
babysitter.
doesn't like her anymore and he gets another, he can't just, he still has to take care of her. And if she must, then if he can't, then she's allowed to go free and the debt that was owed is now cancelled. Doesn't wait for that. So she can't be held there in bondage and treated harshly without having the cohabitation or living rights refused to her. So it's all about right ruling and treating people fairly and understanding that this is not a painful process that we're reading about here. This is actually one that provides the necessary means for everybody to be actually gaining from this, because the master who's getting the service is going to get his pay back for whatever is owed to him. And then for that, he's getting a service. And the one who's giving the service is actually getting cohabitation rights. They're getting food, covering, clothing. And one thing that we take note of in the master is that we realize, even Shaul tells us in his letters, that when we have these three things, we should be content. And so we understand a clear picture of recognizing that this chapter deals with, within a community, there's a way in which you can have debts paid off without harsh treatment, without stealing or breaking people down or stealing their time or stealing from them. But there's a constructive way to benefit everybody. That's really what it comes down to. And that's part of a proper love and the boundaries that are kept and respecting one another. So even from a position of being the master or the master's son, is you can't treat a servant harshly. Yes, you are to instruct them. They must listen to you. And as a servant, we put it in terms of employment today. You don't go in there and do whatever you want in the workplace and demand this and demand that. You work according to that which you're getting paid for and for which you're working out your days, your time, if you will, redeeming the time. And so you respect and honor the conditions of your employment, and the boss is supposed to respect and honor the condition of his need to supply what you need to fulfill your task. Now, I know it doesn't happen like that in the world today, but that doesn't mean we can't operate in the proper standard of set apartness as believers according to this right ruling. And that's what this is setting up in terms of a fair work atmosphere in a community of set apart ones. That's really what it comes down to. you know. Then we got in verse 12 to 14, if you murder, you're going to be put to death. That's the big thing. Now, the Hebrew word for murder, or the one that's translated as one who strikes, strike is nacha, which means to make physical contact with a blow, cause the destruction of an object, strike with the mouth of the sword, or kill. So we understand that this is clearly, when you strike somebody, there's a saying in the old of you strike somebody with the mouth of the sword, because that's even where we get the picture of the sword coming out of the mouth of our master that's coming to strike or smite the nations. So again, it also reminds us again of recognizing how powerful our tongue is, because you might not literally give a physical blow to somebody, but your words can hit harder blows and strike with a very sharp sword that can hurt, harm, and destroy. And premeditated murder is clearly understood in the text as punishable by death. If you killed somebody by accident, it's not murder. And a place of refuge would be allocated where one could flee to, where right ruling would decide whether the killer was actually guilty of murder or not. And if you didn't go to the place of refuge, which we'll get to when we get to the book of Numbers again, Bamidbar, but if you don't go to those places of refuge, the revenger of blood could actually have the permission to destroy you. Blood for blood, life for life. So cities of refuge were allocated when they went into the promised land. That's where an accused murderer could go and flee to and be kept safe for trial. And when they went into the promised land, there were 48 cities that were given to the Levites, and 6 of those were allocated as cities of refuge for a manslayer to flee to. And we'll get into that when we get to that part of the Torah. But the Hebrew word for refuge, miklat, means refuge or asylum, and it denotes the place of refuge from the revenger of blood. The one who's guilty of murder was put to death, while initially those not guilty of homicide would seek asylum at the slaughter place. And those who killed with premeditation would even be dragged from the slaughter place and put to death. If someone was guilty of acting presumptuously against their neighbor in order to kill him by treachery, he could not even find refuge at the slaughter place of the Most High. Then we go on to the right rulings of respecting father and mother. Now, we've discussed this last week about giving weight to or honoring our parents. And again, it's in the context of the house living according to Torah right rulings. And respecting our mother and father is a clear metaphor and witness for us of taking the Torah and instructions of Elohim, the discipline and teaching that the Torah brings us. We must give the proper respect to that and not scoff at the discipline and correction and reproof and encouragement and teaching and training that the word of Elohim brings to us. Now, when we look at the concept of a mother in Scripture, we also understand that the mother is likened to that which teaches, nurtures, nourishes. It's a comforter. Yeshayahu 66 says, as one whom his mother comforts, so I comfort you, and in Jerusalem you are comforted. Now, the term mother is used to describe literally a mother that brings forth a child, but it's also used figuratively to describe a city. You know, if we think of Jerusalem as referred to being likened to a mother that nurtures, cares for, and comforts Israel. Also, Mishle 31 verse 1, where it says, the words of sovereign Lemuel, a message which his mother taught him. Again, right through the parables of Shlomo, we see our call to not reject the Torah of our mother, the teaching of our mother, which is the nourishing aspect of the word of Elohim. It's also understood as one who disciplines. Zechariah 13 verse 3, it says, and it shall be when one prophesies again, then his father and mother who brought him forth shall say to him, you shall not live because you have spoken falsehood in the name of Yahweh. And his father and mother who brought him forth shall pierce him through when he prophesies. So again, it's the collective part of the roles of a mother and father that we are able to understand as bringing up set apart ones in the household of Elohim through the various aspects or characteristics that the Torah and instructions and right rulings of Yahweh bring toward us. So, Mishle 1 verse 8 says, "My son, heed the discipline of your father and do not forsake the Torah of your mother." These are parables. It teaches us the various characteristics that the word of Elohim brings to us. When Messiah was in the flesh, he says, "Oh, I long to gather you like a hen gathers her chicks," because he longed to bring that nurturing comfort of a mother. But he also came to proclaim the disciplining rod of a father. It doesn't mean a father doesn't nourish and comfort, but it's just expressing the various roles. And our ability to respect and not strike them is very clear in not striking or putting to death the very instructions that are given to us by the Torah, the right rulings, the ordinances, the ways of set apartness that our master presents through his Torah. Shaul writes to Timotheus, and he says in 1 Timothy 1 verse 8 to 9, he says, "We know that the Torah is good if one uses it legitimately, knowing this, that the Torah is not laid down for a righteous being, but for the lawless and unruly, for the wicked and the sinners, for the wrongdoers and profane, for those who kill their fathers or mothers, for murderers." So he likens the idea again, also he's teaching Torah here, because the Torah is good if you use it correctly. It's not laid down. That is a picture of, we spoke about the gates of a city is where the judges would sit and administer the justice and right rulings. So therefore, laid down is a picture in today's term where you hear the judge smacking the gavel down. He's laid the final judgment down. You like my sound effect? Okay. So it's laid down, but it would only be laid down when you brought before and are being accused, being guilty of something or not. And the right ruling would be given and laid down. But when you use the Torah legitimately, in other words, you follow it, there's no judgment to be laid down or sentence to be passed against you. But it is passed for the lawless, the unruly, the wicked, the wrongdoers, those who kill their father or mother. In other words, from a parable perspective, those who are putting the Torah to death by saying we don't need it. And that's equated to being a murderer. And there are many people who have murdered the Torah, so to speak. And the Torah is going to be laid down for them, because the wages of sin and lawlessness is death. And so we understand that we have the Torah that both nurtures us, teaches us, disciplines us, comforts us. And the Torah becomes that which trains us to maturity in the master. We don't forsake the Torah because we know that our master, Yeshua Messiah, came to fully proclaim that which we are to live by, and he gave us witness of that by the way he lived. The one who strikes his father or mother is a picture of one who refuses to obey and walk in the Torah of Elohim. And then verse 16 goes on, "Do not kidnap." This would literally be to steal a person. This shows a lack of respect and love for another, and therefore breaks the commands of Elohim. Selling one that was kidnapped was certainly not to be done. You shouldn't be kidnapping anybody anyway, but even selling one who's kidnapped is definite no-no. But it was a practice that was done with the foreign nations. Now we know Yosef was sold by his brothers. So in many ways he was stolen or kidnapped and then sold into slavery by his brothers. And for this, they were worthy of death. And from this picture and parable of Yosef's life with his brothers gives us a witness in the mirror of the word of the redemption that our master brought to us. Worthy of death, yet bought us at a price, paid the price. You know, he was sold as a slave for 20 pieces of silver. And later on, we understand that that would be an evaluation of lives for a male between 5 and 20, because Joseph was not yet 20 years old. He was around 17 years old when he was sold by his brothers. He was still a youth. And so we learn from this a picture of the price that was paid when we look at the atonement price for each being. But so we understand when our master was sold for 30 pieces of silver, that's a price for a female adult between 20 to 50. So we, as his bride, a mature bride, he has paid the price for. That's why he's coming back for a ready, mature bride. one that's without spot and blemish, because he's provided everything that we need, because he bought back our lives from being kidnapped, because he paid the ransom price, and a ransom price is typically paid to a kidnapper. Okay? And the Hebrew word for kidnapped is ganav, which means to steal, kidnap, or be stolen. And Yosef said, when he spoke to the cupbearer to remember him, he says, for I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews, and I've also done naught that they should put me in this dungeon. So he was kidnapped, but he was set free. And it's a wonderful parable. So we realize the price that our master has paid, and we understand that we are therefore have been bought back at a price that it could only be paid by our master. And we understand that part of this being redeemed from being stolen through lawlessness and sin is that we must now give proper weight and respect to the instructions, the discipline, the comfort, the nurturing of our master. And then verses 18 to 24 deals with fights and injuries. If somebody fights with another, I mean, it's inevitable, people fight. But if one loses their ability to work, no, I mean, it shouldn't be. It's like Yaakov saying, you know, with the mouth, you can praise Elohim and you can speak horrible to man. It shouldn't be like this. And that's why we need the right rulings. But there are circumstances where things will happen. And when a fight breaks out between two men and one loses their ability to work, the other must pay him for lost time and injury. So here you have what maybe we could translate in today's terms as, you know, sick leave, you know, or danger pay. You know, now danger pay is presuming that something's going to happen. But it's again, if you get injured and you can't work, you can't earn. So the one who injured you because of a fight that broke out is now responsible to make sure that you get the necessary means to actually eat and have a covering and have a shelter. If the injured man isn't affected in the doing of his work, then no payment's due. I mean, because you can carry on working. You know, we realize this doesn't give us license to go and have fights as long as somebody doesn't get too hurt that they can't work. That's not what this is giving as a grey area. Shaul reminds us we do not fight according to the flesh. The weapons we fight with are not fleshly, but mighty in Elohim for overthrowing strongholds. Shaul reminds Timotheus that we are to fight, but we are to fight the good fight, that of the belief, and laying hold of everlasting life as we hold firm the confession that we've made before many witnesses. And the purposes of these verses in this chapter gives us guidance that there must be proper right ruling and fair justice in all circumstances, and that not one party must gain over another party. There must be fair right ruling. Elohim is just and fair. His right rulings guard us against corruption and violence and unnecessary injury to the community of Israel. If one caused an injury to a pregnant woman and caused her to miscarry, then the sentence is murder, which is death. If there was no injury, but it caused a premature birth due to the fighting, then the one that caused this would still stand to be punished as the husband would lay upon him. And the text goes on to say, if there is injury, then fair payment and restitution must be done. Life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, etc. This isn't revenge. This is fair settlement. Now, the idea of eye for eye or tooth for a tooth, eye speaks of one's freedom. A servant's eye is worth a servant. And same held true for his tooth. There wasn't dentists back in the day. There wasn't false teeth you could go buy on the side of the road. Please don't do that. But, you know, if you don't have teeth, you can't eat. If you don't have eyes, you can't see. How are you going to work? So we understand the principle of the eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth is not a right ruling of mutilation of limbs and body parts. It's a proper settlement for damages caused. It's the correct way that must be imposed and not less or more. And this teaches us a clear standard of right ruling and the just punishment or sentence that must be rendered for each case. You can't have eye for tooth, tooth for eye kind of thing, you know.
And then take the arm.
Or hand for arm, yeah, or foot for leg, or whatever. Our master, we looked at Matit Yehu 5 a couple of weeks ago, and we went through Matit Yehu 5 through to 7. And he goes on, and he's not discarding these right rulings. He's bringing the heart behind it, the letter. He's bringing the spirit, the heart behind these very clear instructions that we are to live by. And when he said, you heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the wicked. But whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And he who wishes to sue you and take away your garment, let him have your outer garment as well. And whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him too. Give to him who asks of you, and from him who wishes to borrow from you, don't turn away. Now, Yeshua wasn't nullifying this Torah of right ruling, of eye for eye and a tooth for a tooth, because it's his right rulings. He was bringing this deeper need for loving commitment that we are to have toward one another, and raises the letter of the word to the spirit behind the word, not changing the word, but bringing a proper understanding to it, that what it comes down to is don't take advantage of another. Rather be wronged if need be, but don't be the one that's taking advantage of another. Some might want to take advantage of you, but don't retaliate with that. A servant of a master should not quarrel, as I read earlier from Shaul's words to Timotheus, but be gentle toward all, able to teach, patient when wronged. The Greek word for patient means to not get angry. Actually, it comes down to that. So it's when you're wronged, slow your anger. Don't let your anger cause you to sin. One of the things that we also see Shaul warning us against, and it was a problem in the assembly in Corinth. In 1 Corinthians 6, he says in verse 6 to 8, but brother against brother goes to be judged, and that before unbelievers? Already then there is a failure with you. Now, brother between brother being judged before those appointed is a proper procedure. But he's saying, and you're going before, you should be able to sort it out, but now you're having to go, but it's before unbelievers. There's failure with you. Why have you got lawsuits among you? Because everybody's, it's like this, I'll get you better. No, I'm now going to challenge you. And then there's this fight that's going on. Why not rather be wronged? He was teaching the master's words here. Why not rather be cheated? You yourselves do wrong and cheat, and that to your brothers. When believers are taking each other to court to settle disputes, what Shaul is saying is there's already a failure. Rather be wronged and cheated than cheat and do wrong to brothers. Because brother that's taking a brother to court before unbelievers is highlighted that they're actually being the cheat. The heart behind these verses is simply this: always seek the good of your brother, and if you do happen to be wrong, don't make it your life's ambition to get even. Let it go. Realize that our debt has been settled, and leave it to our master to find settlement on our behalf if need be. Because vengeance is Yahweh's, it's not yours. Then if a stoned ox is very clearly told to us is not eaten. When an ox killed someone, it's still murder. The ox must be stoned and put to death. And that stoned ox is not permitted to be eaten because we understand that this isn't something that was done as thanksgiving to Yahweh. The life of the ox was not given in thanksgiving to Yahweh for us to have food and covering, etc. It was done as a judgment for putting another to death, and therefore not worthy of being something that's acceptable to be eaten. And also we understand that there's an old saying, you are what you eat. If there's a right ruling. So when we look at these right rulings, did people break some of these right rulings? And I would go and I'd say yes, because Israel departed from the Torah. So if an ox killed somebody and somebody ate that ox that killed somebody, again, it's like you become the characteristics of the things that go against set apartness. The blood would probably not be drained or whatever. But even if people try and do it the right way, it's not done the right way from the beginning. If an owner acknowledged that his ox was in the habit of goring and he's done nothing about it, and it happens again, because he didn't keep his ox confined, he would face punishment of death along with his ox. What this highlights again is responsibility for our actions. And we are responsible for what we have control over, what we are entrusted with by our master, and for what we know. And if we have knowledge and we recognize a problem that can occur and don't take the necessary precautions to prevent it and knowingly expose others to dangers that they might not be aware of, we will be held liable for either injury or death. Think about it for a moment. If we don't warn a brother about his trespasses and he's killed, we're responsible. Yahweh made it very clear to Yechezkiel. You can warn. If people don't want to listen, then, the blood's on them. But this is all about taking responsibility with what's in your hands and in your care. In verse 32, we see the thing here of if a ox gores a male or female servant, he is to give to their master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox is stoned. Again, we're seeing elements here of, look at that price. It's a lot of money, but it's equated to the same value of a person from 20, a female from 20 to 50 years old. So all of these here relate to the idea of proper management and responsibility with what's been entrusted into one's care. Now, in verses 33 to 34, we've got the picture of an ox or a donkey in the pit. Now, Yeshua used this analogy as something that was lawful to do on the Sabbath. When he healed a man on the Sabbath, and he said in Matthew 12, verse 11, "What man is there among you who has one sheep, and if he falls into a pit on the Sabbath, shall not take hold of it and lift it out?" Now, helping a brother out of a pit. Now, a pit, we must understand a lot of people misuse his words to get away with whatever they want to do when they shouldn't have been doing that in the first place. A pit could be that in which someone is trapped by deceit and is injured on a Sabbath. Now, taking someone out of a pit that has injured somebody, literally, physically, is something good to do on a Sabbath. Now, woe to the man to whom the pit or stumbling block comes, we're also told in Scripture. And it was common in ancient Israel to dig pits of various sizes for various reasons, such as storage for grain and fruit, also to trap animals, wild animals. The warning that's given to the one who digs pits in order to trap others is given in Tehillah 7, verse 14 to 16. It says, "See, he who is bound with wickedness and has conceived trouble and brought forth falsehood, he has made a pit and dug it out, and falls into the ditch he made. His trouble turns back on his own head, and his wrongdoing comes down on the top of his head." Mishle 26, verse 27 says, "Whoever digs a pit and falls into it, and whoever rolls a stone, it turns back on him." I want to highlight something here. Falling into the pit on the Sabbath isn't, let me think of some crazy examples we've heard over the years.
Running out of petrol.
Oh, I ran out of petrol, so I had to go, oh, that's a donkey in a pit, No, that's lack of preparation. No, I needed to go and get petrol on the Sabbath, or I need to go buy bread on the Sabbath, because, whatever. People have used some weird excuses. The Hebrew word for digs, when one who digs a pit, kara, means to dig through, excavate, and the object of this verb is usually used to describe a trench or a pit or a cistern, and it's figuratively used to trap a person in an evil plot. And it's used to describe the man of Belial who plots evil. So, our master is the one who redeemed us from destruction. And the word that's translated as pit, shachath, means corruption, destruction, ditch, pit, grave, not pitch. Tehillah 103 reminds us that our Redeemer has redeemed us from the pit of destruction. Now,
Which makes it a life and death.
it's a life, yes, that's what our master was teaching as a parable when he was referring to these right rulings and what's good to do on a Sabbath. It's a life and death situation, The one who's guilty of not covering a pit, Shlomo also reminds us, is liable for payment. You know, Shlomo highlights very clearly to us the craftiness of those who are digging pits in order to catch somebody. Now, or something. Now, what we're told here, if one, in the right rulings, if you didn't cover your pit and you left it open and somebody could fall in there, you're liable for that brought danger to somebody, you know. And it emphasizes the need, what we're looking at in these right rulings, is to take personal responsibility for one's actions. And that is what is sad to see in many ways today, is not being taken serious. It's avoided by people. Don't want to take responsibility today. People hire lawyers to get off of something that they actually should have taken responsibility for. With Yahweh, there's right ruling. We've been called out to live according to these right rulings. We've declared our lives to be bondservants of the Most High, and with that comes the responsibility of upholding his right rulings. We must consider carefully the outcome of our daily living and our choices that we make. Every decision ought to be careful as we consider our actions, our words, our speech. Whatever actions I take, I must be aware of how it's going to affect others. And sadly, we find ourselves, and I'm not making an excuse here, but there are times I think that we realize that we acted in the flesh and not walked according to the Spirit, where we thought we didn't think before we did or spoke. And speaking of the qualities of a leader, Shaul tells Timotheus, we read it last week, should have a good witness with those who are outside, lest he fall into reproach in the snare of the devil. Because we must be careful about what we are representing in terms of our master and his set apartness. So this chapter really deals with loving our master, loving others, and being responsible with what's in our hands, and exercising proper right ruling and not cutting corners and trying to take vengeance and get revenge because somebody's wronged you. Any thoughts on this? Ursula is saying, so ill treatment of the servant or slave renders the covenant null and void, and the debt may be erased based on that, ? Say, even within the time frame of a day of this commencement of this agreement. Well, yes, when somebody was sold to pay off a debt, again, we said the terminology must be understood in context here. It's not enslavement as now you're going to get treated harshly, but you aren't treated fairly with the proper food, covering, and clothing that's supposed to be given to you and agreed upon to pay back the debt. If that is not given to you, then you are allowed to go free. Then that debt is actually nullified. This does not open up a loophole for somebody to say, I got a debt, I'll go serve there, but then I'll complain because you're not giving me what I want and I can get out of this, okay? You know, no, people get very crafty. Because when you become a servant, you say, I'll do what you tell me to do. And if I find that I'm being treated harshly, there's a process. It's not like, okay, I'm treated harshly, I'm not giving you your debt anymore. That would not be, that's where rather be wronged, rather be cheated. That's where you get the balance of you do what you need to do according to righteousness before the master's face. And hopefully everyone else that you engage with is doing the same thing. That's what a perfect set apart environment should be. Amen. Okay, chapter 22. Jackie. Okay.
When a man steals an ox or a sheep, and shall slaughter it or sell it, he repays 5 cattle for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. If the thief is found breaking in and he is struck so that he dies, there is no guilt for his bloodshed. If the sun has risen on him, there is guilt for his bloodshed. He shall certainly repay. If he has not the means, then he shall be sold for his theft. If the theft is indeed found alive in his hand, whether it is an ox or a donkey or sheep, he repays double. If a man lets a field or vineyard be grazed bare, and lets loose his livestock, and it feeds in another man's field, he repays from the best of his own field and the best of his own vineyard. When fire breaks out and spreads to thorn bushes, so that stacked grain or standing grain or the field is consumed, he who kindled the fire shall certainly repay. When a man gives silver or goods to his neighbor to guard, and it is stolen out of the man's house, if the thief is found, he repays double. If the thief is not found, then the master of the house shall be brought before Elohim to see whether he has put his hand into his neighbor's goods. For every matter of transgression, for ox, for donkey, for sheep, for garment, or for whatever is lost which another claims to be his, let the matter of them both come before Elohim. And whomever Elohim declares wrong repays double to his neighbor. When a man gives to his neighbor a donkey or ox or sheep or any beast or to watch over, and it dies or is injured or is driven away while no one is looking, let an oath of Yahweh be between them both. And he has not put his hand into his neighbor's goods, that he has not put his hand into his neighbor's goods. And the owner of it shall accept that, and he does not repay. But if it is indeed stolen from him, he repays to its owner. If it is torn to pieces, then let him bring it for evidence. He does not repay what was torn. And when a man borrows from his neighbor, and it is injured or dies while the owner of it is not present, he shall certainly repay. But if the owner was with it, he does not repay. If it was hired, he is entitled to the hire. And when a man entices a maiden who is not engaged and lies with her, he shall certainly pay the bride price for her to be his wife. If her father refuses absolutely to give her to him, him to her, her to him, if her father absolutely refuses to give her to him, he pays according to the bride price of maidens. Do not allow a practicer of witchcraft to live. Anyone lying with a beast shall certainly be put to death. He who slaughters to an Elohim except to Yahweh only is put under the ban. Do not tread down a sojourner or oppress him, for you were sojourners in the land of Mitzrayim. Do not afflict any widow or fatherless child. If you do afflict them at all, if they cry out to me at all, I shall certainly hear their cry, and my wrath shall burn, and I shall kill you with a sword. Your wives shall be widows, and your children fatherless. If you do lend silver to any of my people, the poor among you, you are not to be like one that lends on interest to him. Do not lay interest on him. If you take your neighbor's garment as a pledge at all, you are to return it to him before the sun goes down. For that is his only covering, and it is his garment for his skin. What does he sleep in? And it shall be that when he cries to me, I shall hear, for I shall favor. Do not revile an Elohim, nor curse a ruler of your people. Do not delay giving your harvest and your vintage. Give me the firstborn of your sons. Likewise, you are to do with your oxen, with your sheep. It is to be with its mother 7 days. On the 8th day you give it to me, and you are set apart men to me. And you do not eat any meat which is torn to pieces in the field. You throw it to the dogs.
Okay, so these regulations that begin the chapter starts with the theft of animals and expands on the 8th commandment that our master gave. And so the payment for stealing an ox or a sheep, if an ox was stolen and slaughtered or sold, the payment would be 5 for a cattle, 4 for a sheep. Obviously, an ox or that from the cattle is bigger than sheep. And verse 4 tells us that if the stolen animals are actually found alive in the thief's hand, then payment would be double. An ox is worth more than a sheep. We know, obviously, are bigger animals, but we also understand that only a high priest or a king, who are both wealthy within the covenant nation, were ever required to bring an ox as a slaughtering. So it also might be highly valued because while a sheep does provide wool, an ox can also accomplish work for its owner as well as provide the necessary means for drawing near to Yahweh. Now, what we take note of here is when we look at this chapter, we take note that if the thief burgled in the night, which typically our master uses this parable, I come as a thief in the night, and the thief was killed by the owner of the house, and it was in the night, then no blood guilt would be put upon him because he's defending his property. It's self-defense. But if the burglar was killed during the daytime, then the owner would be guilty of homicide, because it's again a picture of you should be able to see what's going on, you know. The sun rising on him doesn't necessarily mean that when he's broken in, you know, that when he's breaking in a broad daylight, but rather when evidence that incriminates him is lightened upon him. In other words, a poor man, suddenly he's walking around and he's looking very wealthy. You know, where did you get all these sudden riches? And, you know, he sees another man with his possessions. Hey, I'm sure that's my clothes you're wearing there, or my animals that you've got there, you know. The thief may only be killed if he's caught in the action on his property and not later. And only, you know, if it's later discovered with him, it's not like now I can go and kill him. Then it must be brought before the rulers. Proper restitution must be made for stolen property that's described, double if the property is found on him. And if he's sold what he's stolen, as per verse 1, he must pay the value of what's been stolen and sold in order to make right what the owner has lost, and in any potential income that he's also lost. So if a troublemaker or a thief would steal from his neighbor much needed possession, then the penalty is to pay back two. And so this chapter expands upon the command to love your neighbor as yourself. In other words, don't take advantage of somebody else. Yahweh doesn't leave it in our hands to decide how we're to love one another or what love means to me. He makes it clear what love for him is and what love for our neighbor is, you know. And walking in the Torah means responsibility, not only to take responsibility for one's own actions, but also being responsible in our lives toward others as well, and how we build community Yahweh's way and not by our own insecurities and perceptions and selfish motives that we try and think, I want it my way. If we catch somebody doing something wrong, we have a responsibility to approach them, and if they don't listen, bring it before elders, and if they don't listen, bring it before the assembly, and if they still don't listen, then they treat them as an unbeliever. That's the process. Our master says in Matthew 18, verse 15, if your brother sins against you, go and reprove him between you and him alone. If he hears you, you've gained a brother. Lucas 17, verse 3 says, take heed to yourself. If your brother sins against you, rebuke him. If he repents, forgive him. Yaakov 5, verse 20 says, if any of you goes astray from the truth, or anyone among you goes astray from the truth, and someone turns him back, let him know that he who turns a sinner from the straying of his way shall save a life from death and cover a multitude of sins. In other words, it's like saying, don't just leave somebody to, if they don't want to listen to you, I said, there's a process. But remind them. The reason I'm sharing this with you is because I don't want you to die. You know, this is a picture again, when we look at this in the night, or in the day when the sun has risen upon him, it's again light and darkness. It's a picture of knowledge and ignorance. Ignorance or walking in darkness is an expression of one who's walking in lawlessness, and one who walks in light is one who's being obedient, walking because they understand, they have the knowledge, they have the insight. And it's a picture of when those who come into the light, when they come to the knowledge of the revelation of Yeshua Messiah, and they repent of their sin, then there's mercy for the one who turns from his sin and being cleansed from that. When Yahweh comes as a thief in the night, those who are still found to be in darkness are going to be destroyed. And they'll get what's rightfully due as their punishment for sin and lawlessness, which is death. But children who have come out of darkness, which we are, because we are now children of light, we must walk in the light. We must discern the times. We must keep watch. We understand that we have an enemy that's seeking to rob, steal, and devour. And we know the end of the enemy. It's the lake of fire. Therefore, we must guard right ruling of our master in relationship with each other before his face, showing our love to him in everything that we do. And verse 5 highlights a clear principle for me here. When your field was grazed bare, now you think, oh, my animals don't have any field to go graze in. Now, oh, well, I'll see my neighbor's field looks very nice and I'll let him graze in another's field. I don't just think, oh, well, that's nice. My animals got fed. You're required to give the best of your field and your vineyard to your neighbors because his field was grazed. This is very straightforward and fair. It was a way of paying for the feeding of your livestock. And it's a way of restoring not only what was taken, but also keeping the relationship healthy. You know? This verse can also speak of an owner not properly managing his livestock, so he let his field get grazed bare because he let his livestock loose, and then proceeds to go into his neighbor's field and just takes everything of his neighbor. There are times when people will just take whatever they can, whenever they can, and don't care about anything and not properly manage what they have, and then in the process of not managing what's in their care, actually robbing others what's in their care. This shows poor management. It shows carelessness. There are many people today who have, in many ways, been let loose in a sense as being symbolic of what is termed by many in Scripture as acting like an unreasoning beast. Because they will have no care for what they might rob you of, whether it's your time, your money, your possessions. They don't care what you have to bring forth in a harvest. They'll just take whatever they can. In a metaphoric sense, when people have been let loose to graze all over the place, they're basically robbing everyone of goodness and kindness and take them for a ride, exploiting many. And this we are to be on guard against. This is what this picture of this right ruling gives to us, because grazing can be a picture of eating right and in a prescribed manner and not being let loose on every wind of teaching. Because we are to eat our daily bread. Feed me my lawful bread, my daily bread. You know? When we graze and meditate on other fields, we understand the field, which our master says is the world, and we understand that we are in the world but not of the world. We can relate to these parables of right rulings, teaching us, where are you grazing? Where are you feeding? Are you feeding yourself with all those that are tickling your ears, but it's foreign fields and you're just taking what you can from that? Meanwhile, you've already grazed bare what you can on yours. We understand that Yahweh causes us, as we meditate on his word, to be obedient and not careless. Guardians of the word, not let loose to any wind of teaching that will cause us to fall from our steadfast position in him. You know, our master calls, and when it says you give of the best of your field when your livestock go to another man's field, you give the best of your field, the best of your vineyard. This also teaches a principle. Yahweh requires our best at all times. You know, we can't be careless in our walk. The heart behind this matter is to not be careless and take advantage of others and think, okay, well, whatever. Verse 6 talks about a field that's been set on fire. He who kindled the fire shall repay. Yaakov, as I mentioned earlier, describes for us in James 3 the tongue. That's this little member that actually, you know, it's like a rudder of a ship that steers a ship. It's also this little member that sets on fire Gehinnom, you know, because it can be very striking, this tongue, this member of ours. And kindling a fire is a metaphor in Scripture at times for starting an argument or a fight, causing strife and division within the body. And it can even speak of starting gossiping trails of nonsense, one that spreads and can run like wildfire, destroying everything in its path. Gestures and nonverbal actions that cause doubt regarding another person's integrity can be just as damaging as it can cause an entire assembly to react. So you might not even use the little member of your tongue, but your body language, your expressions, your mannerisms that are done negatively can kindle a fire and destroy. You know, there are times when I'm sure all of us have found ourselves saying things that we didn't mean, and we don't realize the damage it can cause. And what is taken note of here is the one that caused that damage must repay, must make restitution, must make right. We also realize that some fields need to be burned and refined through fire, so to speak, in order to bring about a proper cleansing and growth. We better make sure that before we have the authority to be burning somebody else's field, so to speak, we must know exactly what we're doing, and we'll be held responsible for kindling any fires, so to speak, because we must make sure that we're exercising proper right ruling and that proper justice and fairness is always upheld. If you're not sure of what you're about to say in any given situation, be slow to speak. Keep quiet. If you don't have the relevant facts that are necessary to bring the proper right ruling of the word, keep quiet. When we kindle a fire that may need to be done to flush out sin and lawlessness, we must make sure that we can bring about the proper requirements for a restoration, for a field to start bringing forth a proper harvest, as I'm speaking in very wide parables here, Verses 7 to 15 speak of the need for us to take care of any goods that are entrusted into our care. If somebody leaves something in your possession that's not yours, it's theirs, you take care of it. Now, on a practical level, today, primarily most people at large, not everybody, but a lot of people, you might borrow a drill or a tool or a whatever. I'm using from a guy's point of view. But you know what? If you borrow something, you don't just chuck it around and break it and think, oh, well, you take care of it. You give it back in its right condition. Thank you. Again, it's all about responsibility for one's actions. Now, if somebody's entrusted something into your care and it gets broken or it gets lost, then you must repair it or replace it. Now, if it was lost when you weren't around, like it uses the animals, if you weren't around, then you don't pay because somebody came and stole it. It must be sought out. Did you really just lose it, or did you actually go and sell it and say, I don't know what happened to it? So it highlights the responsibility we are to have with whatever's put into our care. And if something happens while under our management and we're responsible for what happens, then we must be willing to make right with that which has been destroyed or lost. And so when we look at all these right rulings, everything that we keep going on here, we've read these. If there's something that wants to stand out, I'm maybe not going to go into everyone here, but it really highlights, there's almost every verse has a different right ruling. And we could spend hours and hours filtering through these, which is not a bad thing to do when you're meditating on the word and discovering what it means to relate to one another, because that's what all these governing rules for commitment to an assembly or people should be, is that it comes down to taking responsibility. It comes down to being responsible. And you only can be responsible when you actually know the rules, and when you're meditating on the rules, and when you're exercising those rules carefully. We also are told in this chapter there should be no witchcraft. Now, the one who practices witchcraft is described in Hebrew, coming from the verb kasaf, as one who uses witchcraft or practices sorcery, or is a sorcerer or sorceress. And it's often defined as one who's a whisperer. That is one who speaks in secrets. It's not being open about what they're saying. It's like they're always, a slanderer can be likened to one who's practicing witchcraft. We also know the words that Shemoth spoke to the wicked King Shaul when he didn't do what Yahweh had commanded him to do and put everything under the ban and destroy Agag. He said, rebellion is as witchcraft. So when it says a witchcraft or a sorcerer is not to live, we must not, we don't have license here to be going and physically killing people today, but putting somebody under the ban or putting something under the ban or something being dead to you means that there's no interaction anymore. Treat it as one that's not in the living community. So one who's rebelling is no different to a practicer of witchcraft. And I think this is what most people today don't realize. To rebel against the commands for set apartness is likened, in Yahweh's eyes, to be a practicer of witchcraft, for which he says should not be even living. You know, among the many sins that the wicked king Manasseh, who reigned over the house of Yehudah for 55 years, one of the many sins, among all the sins that he did, he was a practicer of witchcraft. It says in 2 Chronicles 33, he made his sons pass through the fire in the valley of the son of Hinnom, practiced magic, used divination and witchcraft, consulted mediums and spiritists. He did much evil in the eyes of Yahweh to provoke him. Nebuchadnezzar had practices or practicers of witchcraft in his service. And Malachi was also told by Yahweh that the practices of witchcraft would be destroyed in the end, along with adulterers, liars, oppressors of widows, orphans, foreigners, and those who do not fear Yahweh. Why? Because those who do not fear Yahweh, adulterers, liars, oppressors of widows, are rebelling against the right rulings and therefore are likened in the same pool as witchcraft practices. You know? Malachi 3 verse 5 says, I shall draw near to you for right ruling. Isn't that a wonderful in terms of what we're reading here today, right rulings? I shall draw near to you for right ruling, and I shall be a swift witness against the practices of witchcraft, adulterers, and against them that swear to falsehood, and against those who oppress the wage earner in his wages, and widows and the fatherless, and those who turn away a sojourner and do not fear me. In the same pool of destruction are those who oppress the wage earner in his wages. We just spoke just now about the picture of employer, employee. You know what? If you really are oppressing somebody by paying them not what they're worth, so that they can't eat, that they can't have shelter, that they can't have covering, you're likened to one who's a practicer of witchcraft. Pay what is just and fair and right. Now, my master gives a parable of the one, remember the workers that went out in different hours of the day and they all got a denarius? And the one who worked the whole day was upset because the one who just worked an hour got the same. And he said, no, because it was you agree. But again, don't leverage an agreement to oppress somebody just to work for you. Agree what's fair, you know. We do have in our world today standards, and I must say some of those standards aren't necessarily fair according to a standard of right ruling for Yahweh. So as set-apart people, let us set the higher standard that's higher than that of a corrupt, oppressive way of the world. So just because the world says the minimum wage is this, you think, oh, well, I'll just pay you that. Is it really fair? Is it really something that's worth? I mean, we all know. Would you like to be doing that? Put yourself in that person's shoes. Now, I'm not saying it's eye for eye, tooth for tooth. It's right rulings and it's right payment for services, but render fairness that one would actually be able to say that's a fair wage that's agreed upon, you know.
And also just when it comes to the witchcraft, today we get it in games, in books, on
Yes.
programs. It's supposed to be dead to you. So you shouldn't be engaging in anything with that.
Yes.
Not just if you're a physical person.
No.
In a book, in a game.
Yeah. Yes, Jackie.
I'm just thinking of, in this day and age that we are working, how quickly things get advertised on social media, instead of stepping in to do the right thing and stopping, for example, the abusive fight that children are having or whatever the case may be, and allowing it to fester with comments from others while this thing is still going on, nobody steps in. So which just propagates whatever is happening. And oftentimes it goes to a state where it could have been prevented before.
Yeah.
But the focus is on how viral it can go.
Yeah.
Instead of an intervention.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just,
So we often comment on bystanders taking videos of things
Yes.
instead of helping.
yeah.
Which, yeah.
Okay, it can be related to the day and the night in some instances, but I think sometimes it is just how much satisfaction the person can get out of it, because I've started the social media thing and everybody else comes and comments about it.
Yeah. Okay. But they.
Carol saying, Leviathan, liars prevail against the believing communities. They have little commitment to truth, yet shine in the assembly. We need to be accountable to Yahweh and one another in absolute truth only. You know, you talk about liars prevailing amongst the believing communities. Yehuda warns us, I mentioned earlier, about while they feast with you. These people they shouldn't actually be there, because perhaps the tolerance of evil and the tolerance of Isabel is what is a primary problem today, is that we should actually be standing up and saying no. And you know what? That's why the righteous remnant will not be a large crowd. At the end, the revelation is we'll see the large crowd of the remnant truly coming together. But that's why it gets difficult when it doesn't mean it's impossible. It actually means it's the right ruling. But when we're standing up and we are actually putting to death witchcraft, rebellion, all those things that should be put to death, in a sense of it shouldn't be in our midst, coming through social media. If you see something and you know somebody, I've often, maybe at times I've been received wrong, where if I see somebody's status and I think that doesn't look right, I'll ask them, this isn't right, that's not the right word, and it often comes across, but should we just let it, like you say, in social media, and everybody joins in? Oh, that's so nice. I had to apologize the other day because I commented on somebody's picture they put on a breakfast, and I thought it looked like bacon, and it was grilled tomatoes under onions. So I did say, is that bacon? I was like, the response was, I've been walking this walk long enough now, surely I know it's not bacon. And, but again, it's again how social media can impact through images and things like that. And, sometimes, yes, we might jump the gun, but you know what? We got to not be afraid to say, hey, what's that? Or, hey, that's not right, or whatever. And be prepared to receive it as well if there's something that we are displaying that is not correct, because we must not be those who are tolerating Isabel, turning a blind eye. Oh, yeah, okay, they'll get it. Oh, no. Oh, here they go again. No. And that doesn't mean we're always out to just nitpick and whatever. It's about a serious set-apart walk that we are to be upholding a standard, because when we get influenced with the worldly ways and the ways of the flesh, it can be so easy just to fall into, like you say, take pictures or video thing where you're joining in with the depravity rather than standing up against the depravity,
Some people, nobody likes conflict. Some people just like it more than others.
Yeah.
So they don't want to confront people. They don't like how it feels.
Yes.
But it is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So don't just turn a blind.
That's what I'm saying. Be slow to speak, quick to listen. Seek advice, if you will, when you need to deal with a matter. Don't always think that somebody else must deal with the matter that you need to deal with, but you can get counsel in the wisdom in the counsel of many, and you can get equipped to deal with any situation that, if something comes across your path and you think, oh, and like today, we've all got phones, we all see things, we all whatever. Now you see something and you're convicted inside, that's not right. But now you don't want to deal with it because somebody else must. No, it's been brought to you, and that's maybe a test for you. How are you going to deal with it? So get equipped to deal with it in the right manner, not in an oppressive manner, but in a one that actually, it might break down, but in order to build up again, rather than just smash and not have any ability to restore. So verse 20 is very clear here. No other mighty ones. We've spoken at large last week about this. Have no other mighty ones against his face. At length, at large. 1 Corinthians 10 verse 21, you're not able to drink of the cup of the master and the cup of demons. You're not able to partake of the table of the master and of the table of demons. We cannot partake in pagan festivities and traditional feasts that are abominable in the eyes of Yahweh and then think, okay, well, we can also partake in his feast too. You cannot mix worship. Now, you are to serve now the mighty ones. You are not to bring slaughterings to other mighty ones. The Hebrew word for slaughterings means to offer a sacrifice or sacrifice, and comes from a verb, zevach, which means thank, offering, or feasting. And Tehillah 4 verse 5 says, offer slaughterings of righteousness and trust in Yahweh. You know, in Hebrews 13, we're told that through him we are to continually offer up a slaughter offering of praise to Elohim. That is the fruit of our lips, giving thanks to his name. So we can't be honoring Yahweh with our lips, which we must be doing, but then we are also joining in with wrong festivities and honoring other mighty ones with false titles and false names. You cannot bring those false titles and names, giving thanks to them as if you're giving thanks to Yahweh. That's having another mighty one that you are not to have. I'm glad I'm entertaining you with my cold lips today with the mighty ones. What? My whitey ones, my mighty ones. Okay. That which should not be in our midst must be put under the ban. The phrase that's used here in terms of put under the ban comes from the word haram, which means to ban, to be utterly destroyed. It also can have the idea of devoted to Elohim, which once given must then, in a manner of speaking, be destroyed for our ability to use it. So in other words, we realize when something is under the ban, when we offer, anyone who slaughters a slaughtering of praise to another mighty one must be put under the ban. That's what we're told here. So therefore, we can't be joining in religious or worship festivities with others. Oh, they invited me to this, whatever it is, and I'm just going to go. Whether it's a wedding that's not done before the face of Yahweh, you can't be joining in with that. That must be put under the ban, which means it cannot have life to you. It's destroyed to you. And you know what? Many people find this one of the toughest things to do in various circumstances. Wedding is one example, for instance. You know? And then we're told, don't mistreat the foreigner. We must be kind to strangers. We must, you know what? We must do our utmost to live at peace with everybody. We're not out there saying, okay, we are to shine the light, and hopefully foreigners will want to become as native born, just as we were foreigners from the covenants of promise. So we must not mistreat them. Otherwise, how will that, and even tying that in with if you offer services or you pay for somebody to do something for you, you don't mistreat them. Again, pay them the right wage, because that's also going to be a light to them to see the qualities and characteristics of Yahweh shining through you, that they may too also want to be. Everything that we do is with the goal of the deliverance of lives. Be that in the way we hire somebody, be that in the way in which we encourage somebody, reprove somebody. You know, all of these things is all about the goal of a bride being delivered to be with the Creator forever. And that's why we also don't mistreat widows and orphans. You know, in Yeshayahu 1, starts out with a clear rebuke for an apostate bride. And Yahweh is saying, let us reason together, though your sins are as scarlet, they'll be white as snow. And a clear witness that if we actually guard his commands, we will eat the good, we'll live in the land. But if we don't, then we'll be eaten up and destroyed by his very word. And we're also told in verse 17 to learn to do good, seek right ruling, reprove the oppressor, defend the fatherless, plead for the widow. These are powerful instructions for righteous living that Israel were not doing at that stage, because everyone was doing whatever was right in their own eyes and looking out for their own interests. And one of the things that we understand is that we must seek right ruling. We must learn to do good. Learning to do good means I must be willing to have my ears attentive to the instructions so that I actually do what's functional in the eyes of the master. And we must learn. You know, Shaul says he's learned to be content in all matters because he pressed through in obedience, even when it was tough or even when it was good. He didn't give up standing firm in righteousness. you know. And part of learning to do good and seeking right ruling equips you, because the next thing in Yeshayahu is, then I can reprove the oppressor, you know. I can, you know, the Hebrew word for reprove, ashar, means to go straight, go on, advance. And it's written in a form that highlights setting straight. In other words, I'm not going in crooked ways anymore. I'm setting straight the clear path because I've sought right ruling, because I've learned to do good. And when we understand this, the Hebrew word for oppressor, chamotz, means ruthless or oppressed. And it comes from the word which means to be leavened or soured. So you're setting straight that which has actually leavened you, as in a picture of leavening through sin. But the process is, in returning to obedience, learn to do good, seek right ruling. We're looking at right rulings today. That's when you'll be able to set straight the crooked matters. And when you're able to set straight, that's when you can be a defender of the fatherless. Those that don't have a father, that don't have the defend is the word shafat, which means judgments. We're looking at shofetim today. So you can bring the proper right ruling to those that have not a covering or protection in that right ruling, and we can plead for the widows. Shaul expresses clearly to Timotheus what qualifies as a widow, and therefore we understand fatherless and widows have nobody to actually protect them. And so we can only be that covering protection in a community to those that don't have that covering protection when we have actually learnt to do good, sought right ruling, and able to set matters straight so that we are not going by every wind of teaching and falling prey to being rocked off our steadfast position, armed in the truth of our Master. Where are we? Still in chapter 22, huh? We're almost there. We're getting there. There's lots here. Oh, yes. If I miss things, one or two right rulings, you're welcome to say, hey, what about that? But some of them are pretty straightforward. And one of them that's also very straightforward is that you do not lend to your brother on interest. It's very clear. Don't now lend to your brother when he has a need and he says, can you help me? And you're able to help him. Scripture is very clear. When it's in your power, in the hand to help somebody and you don't do it and you delay. Or Yaakov says, oh, I hope it's going well with you. Yes, I'll pray for you, but you have the means and you don't help them. You know, that's sin in you. But if you can't help somebody, you've got to be straight and say, I can't help you. I mean, that's a reality. We've had at times, I mean, we all would love to help everybody. But there are times when somebody says that and you say, well, you know, I will pray for you. We're in the same boat. I can't help you. But what I can help you with is a little small, whatever. I'll do what I can. But you don't lay interest on it. You know, to a foreigner, you can lay interest. That was clear. But with a community of people, you're not taking advantage of somebody else in their weakened situation. You are there to help assist, bringing them back to a place where they can actually get going again. Our Master even takes this further, and he's basically saying, don't even worry trying to get it back. That, again, is not a license for the one receiving to say, oh, no, if we follow Torah, you know, I'll smile nicely at him and I'm not even going to have to pay him back. We should have responsibility. If we've borrowed from somebody, we should do our utmost to pay it back as quick as we can. You know, even when there is no expectation from the one that lent to you to have it back. So we have to look at both sides and don't take advantage of anybody. Now in verse 29, when it says here, do not delay, verse 28 says, do not revile Elohim, nor curse a ruler amongst your people. Again, just wanted to highlight that the term used here for Elohim is a reference to the leaders in your midst. It's not Elohim as in the place of Yahweh. It's those that are officiating the right rulings, the leadership, appointments of eldership or leadership over the body. They are regarded as one that are a little bit higher than you in the instruction of right rulings and set apart living to take advice from, where Hebrews 13 makes it very clear to not neglect those that are teaching you, obey those leading you, listen to what they say, because it won't go well for you if you don't. So again, don't revile those that are over you. Don't disregard what they're trying to teach you. Take careful consideration to follow their instructions. And then verse 29, do not delay your harvest, the word giving there, and your vintage. Give me the firstborn of your sons. The principle here is very clear. Don't delay in what you should be doing. Now, when we understand this, a lot of people are procrastinating in giving their best to Yahweh. Now, that giving of yourself is in everything that you do, because even in your workplace, you're working unto Yahweh. You're working for a person that's paying you, but it's working to Yahweh. And you give your time, you give your resources the way you should. You don't delay, so you don't cut corners and think, oh, I'll get away with this, I'll get away with that. Too many people, again, today are procrastinating in bringing to Yahweh what's Yahweh's. We come to every Sabbath, every feast, we understand the principle of putting Yahweh first. And this is, again here, this idea of not delaying, because what does delaying do? The Hebrew word for delay, achar, means to remain behind or tarry or to defer or hesitate or be slack. And this word is actually translated as staying long in the proverb that Shlomo gives in Mishle 23 in describing those who have contentions, complaints, they feel hurt without cause, they have woes and sorrows. And who are those? They are those looking long at the wine. It's a parable of looking at the wrong things. It's the parable of looking at whoring and mixed teachings and corruption. And the reason I'm highlighting this idea and expanding on the concept of delaying is to simply highlight the problem that so many people have today when they're not looking intently into the mirror of the word, and they are forgetting what they ought to look like, but are looking intently to corrupt teachings and resorting to a corrupted representation of set apartness, which is not set apart. From a figurative point of view, so many people are looking into mixed theologies that when you stay too long at, you become drunk, because you get drunk on the maddening adulteries of the whore. And due to corrupted and mixed theologies of falsehood that are taught as teachings of man that are to be followed, they are putting Yahweh's commands aside and therefore are being equipped wrongly in delaying in giving their best and giving their all to Yahweh. Now, an example, if you delay in giving to Yahweh what is due to him, by the time that you want to give to him, you're not going to give to him what should be given to him. I mean, that's a pretty easy thing to think of. I always bring it back to, because the thing that hits people the most, and maybe not deliberately wanting to hit people with this, but when it comes down to people's pockets, let's put it that way, they don't always want to hear the truth. Their purses. Everybody thinks they have purses with holes. No. Yahweh didn't make you with holes. He's given you garments of righteousness and right ruling. Now, I'll give an example of delay tactics that many try and do. And if someone has 10,000 rand or dollars, pesos, whatever currency you want to use it in, now you know that you must give at least, and I say at least because people think, what a shrew, they sweat when they think of a tithe. At least it starts there. Non-negotiable. And above that is contributions and gifts and everything else. You know that at least 1,000 of that 10,000, often people are not content and they contemplate giving. And they delay to give for whatever reasons. I mean, they can come out with an encyclopedia of reasons. And they find themselves having to quickly pay everything else that they have, and then they find they're left with delay, achar, left behind, say with 1,500. Now it gets a lot harder to give the 1,000 out of that 1,500, because then you're only left with 500. And so when seeing what little is left, the hesitation to give gets increased. And they think, I can't afford to do this. I'll do it next month. When I get there, I know I'm going to get there. Delayed obedience is disobedience, bottom line. Don't delay. Enough said on that topic. Let's go to the next chapter. Chapter 23.
Do not bring a false report. Do not put your hand with the wrong to be a malicious witness. Do not follow a crowd to do evil, nor bear witness in a strife so as to turn aside after many, to turn aside what is right. And do not favor a poor man in his strife. When you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, you shall certainly return it to him. When you see the donkey of him who hates you lying under its burden, you shall refrain from leaving it to him. You shall certainly help him. Do not turn aside the right ruling of your poor in his strife. Keep yourself far from a false matter, and do not kill the innocent and the righteous, for I do not declare the wrong right. And do not take a bribe, for a bribe blinds the seeing ones and twists the words of the righteous. And do not oppress a sojourner, as you yourselves know the heart of a sojourner, because you are sojourners in the land of Mitzrayim. And for 6 years you are to sow your land, and shall gather its increase. But the 7th year you are to let it rest, and shall leave it, and the poor of your people shall eat. And what they leave, the beasts of the field eat. Do the same with your vineyard and your olive yard. 6 days you are to do your work, and on the 7th day you rest, in order that your ox and your donkey might rest, and the son of your female servant and the sojourner be refreshed. And in all that I have said to you, take heed, and make no mention of the name of other mighty ones, let it not be heard from your mouth. 3 times in the year you are to celebrate a festival to me. Guard the festival of Matzot. 7 days you eat unleavened bread, as I commanded you, at the time appointed in the new moon of Aviv. For in it you came out of Mitzrayim, and do not appear before me empty-handed. And the festival of the harvest, the firstfruits of your labors which you have sown in the field. And the festival of the ingathering, at the outgoing of the year, when you have gathered in the fruit of your labors from the field. 3 times in the year all your males are to appear before the Master Yahweh. Do not slaughter the blood of my slaughtering with leavened bread, and the fat of my festival shall not remain until morning. Bring the first of the firstfruits of your land into the house of Yahweh your Elohim. Do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. See, I am sending a messenger before you to guard you in the way and to bring you into the place which I have prepared. Be on guard before him and obey his voice. Do not rebel against him, for he is not going to pardon your transgressions, for my name is in him. But if you diligently obey his voice and shall do all that I speak, then I shall be an enemy to your enemies and a distresser to those who distress you. For my messenger shall go before you and shall bring you in to the Amorites and the Hittites and the Perizzites and the Canaanites and the Chivites and the Jebusites, and shall cut them off. Do not bow down to their mighty ones, nor serve them, nor do according to their works, but without fail overthrow them, and without fail break down their pillars. And you shall serve Yahweh your Elohim, and he shall bless your bread and your water, and I shall remove sickness from your midst. None shall miscarry or be barren in your land. I shall fill the number of your days. I shall send my fear before you, and cause confusion among all the people to whom you come, and make all your enemies turn their backs to you. And I shall send hornets before you, which shall drive out the Chivite, the Canaanite, and the Hittite from before you. I shall not drive them out from before you in 1 year, lest the land become a waste, and the beasts of the field become too numerous for you. Little by little I shall drive them out from before you, until you have increased and you inherit the land. And I shall set your border from the sea of reeds to the sea of the Philistines, and from the wilderness to the river. For I shall give the inhabitants of the land into your hand, and you shall drive them out before you. Do not make a covenant with them, nor with their mighty ones. Let them not dwell in your land, lest they make you sin against me when you serve their mighty ones, when it becomes a snare to you.
Okay, Nadine said, these types of people commit murder with their tongues. To me, liars and thieves are murderers. Well, they're equated to that because life and death is in the power of the tongue. And the beginning of this chapter, verse 1 and verse 7, makes it very clear, do not bear false witness. Now, the Hebrew word translated as false comes from the word shav, which means falsehood, lies, emptiness, worthlessness. And it's also translated in Scripture as naught. We take note that the first time that this word shav is actually used in Scripture is in the command to not bring the name of Yahweh, our Elohim, to naught. In other words, not to present it as worthless and empty and false, but we are to present him and make our boast in him, the true living one. And what we see here is in Zechariah 10 verse 2, a rebuke was given again to a backsliding nation. It says, the household idols spoke emptiness. The diviners saw falsehood and relate dreams of deceit. They comfort in vain. Therefore they have wandered about like sheep. They are afflicted, for there is no shepherd. So because of the false witnesses and bringing the name of Yahweh to naught, people were wandering around without a shepherd because they didn't want to look to the good shepherd of Israel. As a result of idolatry that had highly been promoted by false prophets and diviners of evil, many had wandered away from the truth. And today it's the same. Stranded without a shepherd who's able to keep them from falsehood and deceit. Tehillah 26 verse 4 says, I have not sat with men of falsehood, nor do I enter with pretenders. Because think about it, to sit in Hebrew is often used as an idiom for learning, and it becomes clear here, again, who are you joining with, say on a Sabbath or in any time that you're studying the word? What is very clear here, and the psalmist made it very clear, I don't sit with liars. I don't sit with those who speak falsehood and pretenders. So stop learning from false sources that nullify and bring to naught the Torah and the name of Yahweh, and don't properly represent the character and likeness of his set apartness. Shav is also a reference in scripture that's used to refer to idol worship, which is performed in the lifting up and celebration of pagan-rooted festivals and feasts of sun worship, which is none other than a partaking of the table of demons, which we are to have nothing to do with. And those who lift up their lives to falsehood in the tradition of lies are not going to be able to enter into the presence of Yahweh. You know, Mishle 6, verse 19, it says, a false witness breathing out lies and one who causes strife among brothers. Now, this forms part of a list of 6 things that Yahweh hates. And we understand that this is something that Yahweh cannot tolerate. We must be speakers of the truth. Tehillah 101 verse 5 says, him who secretly slanders his neighbor I cut off. I do not tolerate one who has a haughty look and a proud heart. Mishle 19 verse 9 says, a false witness does not go unpunished, and he who breathes out lies perishes. So one of the things that we take note of, the 10 words that our master gave is, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And the Hebrew word that's translated as false there is sheker, which means deception, falsehood, disappointment, lies, and comes from the verb shakar, which means to deal falsely with. Now, Mishle 6 that I mentioned about a false witness breathing out lies, forming part of characteristics of the man of Belial. And the phrase, a false witness breathing out lies, is yaficha ka'avim ed shaker, which comes, literally could be a false witness that is spoken by lying. Now, that makes sense, but it's like, or the breath of lies that witness falsely. So it's not the breath of lies, it's the breath of lies. And isn't that what's going around a lot? People are breathing in the breath of lies, and they're on the path to death rather than receiving a recovery of breath by the life-giving word of our Master unto life. And so we must have nothing to do with falsehood. I mean, it really, the Shaul goes in many of his letters in the renewed writings warning against slandering, back-talking, blasphemy, false witnesses. We are to walk in the truth. We are ambassadors of the truth. We are to be servants of the truth. And therefore, we are to stand for the truth. When it says here, you know, do not follow a crowd to do evil or to bear witness in a strife so as to turn aside after many, to turn aside what is right. Following on from, you know, not bringing a false report and not putting your hand with the wrong to be a malicious witness, it goes on. Don't join a crowd to do evil. Stand for the truth. You know, Mishle 1 gives us a wonderful parable here when it says in verse 10, my son, if sinners entice you, do not give in. If they say, come with us, let us lie in wait for blood. Let us ambush the innocent without a cause. Let us swallow them alive like the grave and entirely like those going down to the pit. Let us find all precious goods. Let us fill our houses with spoil. Cast in your lot among us and let us have one purse. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Keep your foot from their path, for their feet run to evil and they hurry to shed blood. And all too often you hear the term today, they all can't be wrong. And the answer is, oh, yes, they can. Don't follow a crowd to do evil. It's simple as plain as that, you know. Most people think, oh, they're many, it must be the way to go. Don't be dysfunctional because many are dysfunctional. That's another way to put it. Don't show favor to the poor in his strife or turn aside right ruling. Again, it's about exercising justice. Just because somebody is poor and now you pity him by his face, and then you break right ruling and you show favor to him in his strife, and you take his side when he actually should be doing something different, that's breaking the justice of right ruling. Don't turn aside right ruling. When a poor man's going through strife, right ruling is also fair and just. Just because he's poor in his position or he's weak doesn't cause him to get out of a responsibility of being upheld according to the right rulings of our master. Love your enemies. You know, Matthew 5 again, my master says, you have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those cursing you, do good to those hating you, pray for those insulting you and persecuting you, so that you become sons of the Father in the heavens, because he makes the sun rise on the wicked and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous. For if you love those loving you, what reward have you? Are the tax collectors not doing the same to you? And if you greet your brothers only, what do you do more than others? Are the tax collectors not also doing to you? Therefore, be perfect as your Father in the heavens is perfect. Now, at the time of our master, there were a lot of sayings that had become commands under the teachings of men. And one of them was to hate your enemy. Our master's quoting Torah. Love your enemies. You know, do good to those hating you. Pray for those cursing you. Our master said, you have heard that it was said, it was not written that you are to hate somebody. Never. What we do take note of when the psalmist says, do I not hate those who hate you? What he's saying is, I'm not associating with those that don't want to associate with you. That's why we don't become unequally yoked in serving the master as we should. And the ending of this chapter highlights again the Sabbath laws, the importance of the Sabbath, which not only flows weekly as a cycle that we walk in, but we also understand the pattern of the feasts and the guarding of the feasts that we are to be looking toward. If we're not keeping Sabbaths correctly, we're never going to show up for his appointments, you know. In 6 days you do your work, and the seventh day you desist from your normal occupational work. This doesn't mean that you sleep 24 hours and you stay in your pajamas and you don't care about any other things that need to be done. Sabbaths are called out, set apart gatherings for the bride of Yahweh to come together, to sit at his feet, to hear his word, to be nourished by his word, to be refreshed in his word, so that you can go out and do your occupational work in the other 6 days that you are, so that you can be refreshed. And also that your animals can be refreshed because they're not out working the fields, that your servants can be refreshed because they're not out doing what you have been paying them to do for the other 6 days. And in all that I've said to you, take heed not to make the mention of the name of other mighty ones. Let it not be heard from your mouth. We've discussed this again at large. I'm not going to go in at length. I keep saying at large. At length. Because it really comes down to having our speech seasoned with salt. And then he goes and he reminds us the 3 times of the year that we are to guard the festivals. And what we see is a pattern of drawing near to Yahweh and coming before his face is a pattern that's throughout all his feasts. So when it says here, do not appear before me empty-handed at the festival of Matzot, the way you start is the way that you should want to finish. Or the way you finish is the way that you'd want to start, whichever way you want to do it. So that we never come before the master empty-handed. We're always coming. Every time, the 3 times of the year are centered around harvest times. It's a product of bringing before him the produce of one's life as a reflection of praise. That therefore, coming before him with empty hands would signify that you have not been working unto him, that you have delayed in giving him, that you have neglected the duty and now found to actually be a false witness before his face and risk being cast out as not being known. So we understand the concept of all of these right rulings teaching us to keep Yahweh's appointments his way. And his appointments that are kept are a reflection of our love for him because he first loved us. And in bring the first fruit of your offerings, the first fruit of your land to the house of Yahweh your Elohim. And then it says, do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. And we see in the Torah a number of times this phrase used in the context of drawing near, because this was a practice for pagan-rooted fertility worship. They would, as the nations of the land, what they would do is they would take a young goat, a live young goat, and boil it in its mother's milk and take that milk and scatter it over the land in their presentation of fertility worship to bring forth the land's produce. So Yahweh is basically setting forth here, this is how you worship me. Don't worship me the way the pagans worship their false mighty ones, which you are not to have on your lips.
Yeah, if you want to be prosperous, you bring to Yahweh what's his.
Yes.
That's how you prosper.
Yes. You know. And then I'm sending my messenger before you to guard you in the way. Here, obviously, it's a clear picture of our master came and he has given us the way in which we are to walk. Now, we know that the messenger of Yahweh, he often sends messengers to come and give clear instructions. And sometimes he is his own messenger, as we've seen through Scripture. You can read the article, The Messenger of Yahweh, that I've done. But it's also all these types. The messengers of Yahweh is anybody that brings the message of Yahweh to a people to call them to obedience and warn them if they don't obey the walk that he's calling for us to walk in. Malachi, the book of Malachi, means my messenger. And therefore, it doesn't matter the name of the messenger. Yehoshua was one that was appointed to go ahead of the people to lead them as Yahweh's voice and mouthpiece, as a messenger of set apartness as they go into the land, sending before. Always the prophets that he would send rising early, all shadow picturing the perfect coming of our master in the flesh, preceded by Yochanan the Immerser, that would prepare the way in the wilderness and make straight the paths for our Elohim. But he still comes to be that one that would lead us in the strength of his truth to our inheritance, to be with him forever. So we have his word that's made very clear to us, and therefore through his word and the prophets that he sent, through his own voice, he's given us a clear picture of what it means to follow the good shepherd by sheep that know his voice, and we are to diligently obey his voice. We are to guard and obey his voice, because when it says my name is in him, we understand the concept here, Yehoshua, just the vowel pointing difference between the expression of saying Yahushua and Yehoshua is Yahushua is a declaration of Yahweh is he who saves, whereas Yehoshua is also he saves, literally. So we understand that when Yeshua came, he says, many have come in their own name and you follow them, but I've come in my Father's name and you don't want to follow me. So he was basically saying, I'm the one that you need to be listening to and obeying, and you don't want to listen to me. And Yahweh made it very clear that he would drive out the nations before us. And he mentions the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, 6 of the 7 he mentions here. And he will drive them out, but he won't drive them out quickly. He'll drive them out little by little, because lest the land would be overrun by beasts and we wouldn't know how to contain it. So it's a wonderful picture again how Yahweh is patient with us. This doesn't give us license to not be overcomers. But as we grow in the knowledge of our master, there are things that will surface that will be destroyed out of our lives. We don't say, oh, well, yeah, I know that should be destroyed out of my life, but he'll get to it next month. If it's already apparent in your life, it should be getting out. Okay, does that make sense? And we learn a great deal from this of how our master has gone before us. He has prepared the way. Therefore, we do not have an excuse not to follow in that way. Ursula is just saying here, is there perhaps a reason why Yahweh would repeat all this so closely together? We just went through this in the last chapter. It is said that he has a reason for everything, right? Or rather, a specific reason for the passages we just went through. Okay, I need be a bit more specific. Yes, it does sound there's certain things that he's repeating, and for good reason, because we need to hear things over and over so that we are set apart before him. When we look at these nations, we can learn a great deal of that which our master says will drive out from us. All these nations, you can look in the notes, I've been through this before, and you can look in the notes for further study. We learn a great lesson from all these nations on practical things that we can get out of our lives. I'll run through it very quickly, but not too in depth. But the Amorites means cave dwellers, coming from a word which means to utter or to speak, or can also represent boasters. And cave dwellers are typically understood as those that were busy with dark witchcraft things in caves. And so it also teaches us that these are the ones that they were the biggest and the strongest people in the land of Canaan. So in other words, this represents for us the big mouths, the know-it-alls. And we must be on guard against those. And we must also be on guard about not being the one that knows it all and always the one that is telling everybody. You know, we should allow humility to be a product of our lives. The Amori represents those that are full of pride and puff themselves up with the Amorites, you know, that are full of pride. They're puffing themselves up with knowledge because they're not applying the knowledge, but they want to be the ones that think they know everything. The Hittites means sons of Heth or sons of terror. Again, it speaks of those that are always trying to torment and threaten and impose fear upon you, using deceit as a tactic. We must be on guard against that. The Perizzites, the Perizi, is a people belonging to a village, and it can also have the meaning of having a breach in the wall. We get the picture of people in a village with a broken down wall. We get a picture of not being steadfast in being obedient to the truth, not setting proper boundaries or repairing the breaches, but allowing, compromise into our lives. This is something that we must be on guard against, those that are trying to bring compromise in our lives. We must drive compromise out. We must be repairers of the breach, repairing the old way so that we can be restorers of the truth. The Canaanites, its root meaning, Canaani, means to be zealous or be a lowlands people rather than those on the heights. It can also have the idea of being defeated or made low, and this is a picture of overcoming depression, anxiety, stress, worry, fear. The Hivites, the Hivi, are villagers or dwellers on the high place, so the opposite, being, on guard against going to the false places of worship, the heights of depravity. The Jebusites, or the Jebusi, comes from a word bus, which means to thresh or trample or trod down or to desecrate and utterly reject. So this speaks of being on guard against rebellion, about trampling underfoot everything that's brought in terms of building you up. So when our master said, don't worship the way they do, all of these nations were doing things in their own characteristic way of that which doesn't represent Yahweh's set apartness and humility and strength of being built up as one. And the things that will keep you out, Yahweh's saying he'll drive that out. Little by little, he'll drive it out of you. So as we go through the refining power of his word, the dross of these things, whether it's pride, whether it's fear, whether it's wrong worship, whatever it is, wrong words, he will drive it out. And when it surfaces, it must be out of our lives. We must be ready and willing to let it be driven out so that it has no more. Because ultimately it's about verse 24 when it says, serve no other mighty ones. Do not have other mighty ones. Don't bow down to them. If you're not letting Yahweh drive out that which is foreign in your worship, you're always going to have foreign mighty ones. You're always going to be bowing down to that which should not be. And when you follow Yahweh, and as he drives out and refines you and restores you, he will see that your bread and your water shall be blessed. This is a picture of prosperity, nourishment, care, shalom. Bread speaks of community, as Shaul reminds us in Corinthians. Water speaks of refreshing water of life, and we are to be a people that have the refreshing power of our Master's word living in us so that we lack nothing. Therefore, when something surfaces that needs to be driven out, we don't ponder about should I, can I, can't I? It's yes, Yahweh. Thank you for showing it to me. It's out. And we are done with sin as we stay in him. Because that's the blessing of the refinement of our Master's word. Rules for set-apart living are very clear. We are not to partake of what the world partakes in, according to the lust of the flesh. We are to walk according to the Spirit. And just before lunch, we will get into chapter 24, which is a nice chapter to summarize the right rulings that we have as a boundary or boundaries for set-apart living, and highlights the covenant that's confirmed through the right rulings that are given to us. But 2 Corinthians 6, verse 14 to 18 says, "Do not become unequally yoked with unbelievers, for what partnership has righteousness and lawlessness? And what fellowship has light with darkness? And what agreement has Messiah with Belial? Or what part does a believer have with an unbeliever? And what union has the dwelling place of Elohim with idols? For you are a dwelling place of the living Elohim, as Elohim has said, I shall dwell in them and walk among them, and I shall be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. Therefore come out from among them and be separate, says Yahweh, and do not touch what is unclean, and I shall receive you. And I shall be a father to you, and you shall be sons and daughters to me, says Yahweh the Almighty." So it's all about our set-apartness, walking in the right rulings of our Master, the legal procedures on how to love one another as an expression of the love that we have for our Master being lived out practically each and every day. On that note, we're going to close for lunch, and we'll be back in an hour, and we'll carry on with chapter 24 and then go into Yirmiyah. Let's pray. Master Yahweh, we bless and praise you, and we exalt you, and thank you that we can sit here and have our ears pierced with the clear right rulings for set-apartness that will help us to stand upright, armed in your truth, and boldly declaring a trustworthy witness of your kingdom that is coming. Thank you that we can also have a meal together in your presence as we come to sit at your Sabbath table. And thank you that you've called us out of the corruption of demonic tables that are so easily worshipped by the things of the flesh, that we can come to your set-apart presence and be able to partake in a Sabbath keeping that marks us as yours forever. We thank you for your provision, your protection, your covering. We thank you for your life that you give us and the comfort that we have in your presence. In the name of Yahushua, our Messiah, amen and amen.